The station thought it controlled the situation. Then the truth walked through the door. Victoria Carter entered the local police station carrying a sealed legal warrant that looked ordinary to anyone who did not understand its importance. She was calm, professional, and completely focused on the reason she was there. To the people around her, she appeared to be another visitor handling a legal matter. They saw a document. They saw a conversation. They did not see the story behind it. They did not know the responsibility connected to the sealed pages in her hands. Victoria had spent years learning that the strength of the legal system depended on trust. Certain documents were protected because timing mattered. Information mattered. The people handling that information mattered. A sealed warrant was not simply paper with words written on it. It represented a process built to protect fairness and accuracy. Victoria understood that better than most. She knew that sometimes the most important moments were not the loudest ones. Sometimes they were the quiet moments when someone had to decide whether they would follow a process or ignore it. Across the station, Officer Daniel Whitmore continued his routine duties. After more than a decade in local law enforcement, he had developed confidence in his ability to handle difficult situations. He believed experience helped him recognize problems quickly and make decisions when others hesitated. But experience could only reveal what was visible, could not automatically reveal what was hidden. Officer Whitmore did not know who Victoria really was. He did not know why she carried the sealed warrant. He did not know that the document represented a matter connected to a much larger legal process. From his perspective, the situation appeared simple. But Victoria knew that appearances often created incomplete stories. She had seen how quickly people could form opinions before understanding the full picture. A person could be judged by a moment. A document could be dismissed because its importance was not immediately obvious. A situation could be misunderstood because the truth had not yet arrived. That was why Victoria remained patient. She did not walk into the station trying to prove her importance. She did not need to announce her background or demand recognition. She trusted that the proper process would eventually reveal what needed to be known. Imagine standing in a room where people believe they understand your role, while the most important details about you remain unseen. Imagine carrying information that could completely change the way people view the situation, but choosing silence because protecting the truth matters more than proving yourself. That was the strength Victoria carried with her that day. She understood that real authority was not about controlling every conversation. It was about knowing when patience, preparation, and integrity mattered most. The sealed warrant remained protected in her possession as the conversation continued. Nobody inside the station realized that this ordinary-looking moment was connected to something much bigger. Nobody realized that one decision made inside those walls would soon bring attention far beyond the local level. At that moment, everything still appeared normal. The station was busy. The officers continued their work. Victoria stood quietly with the document that held a significance few people could see. But history often changes in ordinary places. The biggest turning points do not always begin with dramatic announcements. Sometimes they begin with one person walking through a door while carrying a truth that others are not ready to understand. The conversation inside the station continued, but the most important part of the moment was not what people were saying. It was what they did not know. Victoria Carter remained standing with the sealed warrant in her possession, watching carefully as assumptions began forming around her. She understood something that many people often forgot. The first impression of a situation was rarely the complete story. People could see a person. They could see a document. They could see a moment. But they could not always see the purpose, the history, or the responsibility behind it. Victoria had learned throughout her career that patience was sometimes the strongest response. She knew that revealing every detail immediately was not always the right choice. Some information had to be handled carefully because the process protecting it mattered just as much as the information itself. Officer Daniel Whitmore looked at the situation through the experience he had built over years of service. He believed in maintaining order and making decisions based on what he could observe. His confidence came from countless situations where quick judgment had been necessary. But this moment carried something different. It required understanding something that was not immediately visible. Officer Whitmore did not know the full purpose behind Victoria's visit. He did not know the significance of the sealed warrant. He did not know that the document represented a legal responsibility connected to a much wider process. To him, the situation appeared like a routine interaction. But Victoria knew that important matters were often hidden beneath ordinary appearances. She remembered every time she had seen people make conclusions before they understood the facts. She knew how quickly a person could be underestimated when others only saw one small part of their story. That was why she stayed composed. She was not trying to create conflict. She was not trying to make anyone feel embarrassed. Her goal was simple: protect the integrity of the process and allow the truth to be handled correctly. Imagine being in a room where people have already decided what they think about you before they know who you are. Imagine having the ability to change their opinion instantly, but choosing not to because the right outcome matters more than personal recognition. That was the choice Victoria made. Her confidence did not come from needing others to acknowledge her importance. It came from knowing that the truth would eventually speak for itself. As the discussion continued, small details began to stand out. Victoria's words were careful. Her explanation was respectful. Her patience showed that she understood the importance of every step being followed properly. She was not acting like someone trying to win an argument. She was acting like someone protecting a responsibility. Around the station, the situation began to feel different. Some people started noticing that there was more to the story than they first believed. The sealed warrant was not just another document. Victoria was not just another visitor. And the questions surrounding the situation were becoming harder to ignore. Officer Whitmore still believed he understood the circumstances in front of him, but the full picture remained hidden. He did not yet realize that the choices made inside the station would soon reach beyond the walls of the building. He did not know that a document he viewed as ordinary was connected to a level of legal importance that required careful attention. The day continued like any other day, but the balance inside the station was slowly changing. Because sometimes the most important moments begin when people believe they already know the truth. And sometimes the person everyone overlooks is the one carrying the information that changes everything. The sealed warrant remained at the center of the situation, but the real story was not only about the document. It was about the responsibility connected to it and the people who were willing to protect that responsibility. Victoria Carter understood that every legal process depended on trust. A document could only serve its purpose when the people handling it respected the rules surrounding it. That was why she continued to remain patient, even as others around her struggled to understand why the situation mattered so much. She knew that reacting emotionally would only distract from the real issue. The goal was never to create a confrontation. The goal was to make sure the process was respected. Officer Daniel Whitmore continued observing the situation from his own perspective. He had spent years working in law enforcement, and his experience had taught him to look for clear answers quickly. But sometimes the most important details were the ones that were not immediately visible. He saw Victoria standing in the station with a sealed legal document. He saw someone asking for careful handling of a matter. What he did not see yet was the larger purpose behind the document and the reason it required special attention. Victoria knew that people often judged situations based on what they could see in front of them. A person's appearance, a location, or a single moment could create assumptions before the complete story was known. She had learned that truth required patience. It required people to look deeper than the surface. It required a willingness to accept that the first explanation was not always the correct one. The sealed warrant represented more than information. It represented a chain of responsibility involving people who depended on each step being completed correctly. Victoria understood that one careless decision could affect more than the people standing in the room. It could affect confidence in the system itself. Imagine carrying something important while everyone around you believes it is ordinary. Imagine knowing the full story while others only see a small piece of it. Imagine choosing patience when you have every reason to explain everything immediately. That was the quiet strength Victoria showed. She did not need to prove that she belonged in the room. She did not need to demand that others recognize her importance. She trusted that facts would eventually become clear. As the conversation continued, the difference between authority and responsibility became more noticeable. Officer Whitmore had authority because of his position. Victoria carried responsibility because of the role she was protecting. Those two things were not always the same. True authority was not simply the ability to make decisions. It was the ability to understand the impact of those decisions. Slowly, the people inside the station began noticing that Victoria's calm behavior was not accidental. Her confidence came from preparation. Her patience came from experience. Her approach showed someone who understood that the truth did not need to be rushed. It needed to be handled correctly. Officer Whitmore still believed he was dealing with a situation contained inside the station. He did not yet realize that the sealed warrant was connected to something much larger. He did not know that people beyond the building would eventually need to understand what happened. For now, everything remained quiet, but the foundation of the situation had changed. The document, the decisions being made, and the assumptions surrounding Victoria were all moving toward a moment when the hidden truth would finally become impossible to ignore. The atmosphere inside the station began to shift as the importance of the situation became harder to ignore. What had first appeared to be a simple interaction was slowly revealing deeper questions about authority, responsibility, and the importance of protecting a legal process. Victoria Carter remained calm throughout the entire moment. She understood that situations involving sensitive documents could not be handled through assumptions or quick reactions. They required patience, accuracy, and respect for the procedures designed to protect everyone involved. The sealed warrant represented more than information written on paper. It represented a legal responsibility that depended on careful handling from the people who came into contact with it. Victoria knew that the value of the document was not only found in what it contained. Its importance came from the trust placed in the process surrounding it. Officer Daniel Whitmore continued to believe he understood the situation. From his position inside the station, he saw himself as someone responsible for maintaining order and making decisions based on the circumstances in front of him. His experience had taught him to be confident, but this moment presented a challenge that experience alone could not solve. The missing piece was understanding what he could not immediately see. He did not know the full background behind Victoria's visit. He did not know the reason the sealed warrant required such careful protection. He did not know that the situation connected to a much larger legal responsibility beyond the walls of the station. Victoria recognized the danger of allowing a small misunderstanding to become a larger problem. She knew that once a process was damaged, rebuilding trust could become much more difficult. That was why she remained focused on the right approach. She was not interested in winning a disagreement. She was interested in making sure the correct procedures were followed. Imagine holding the key piece of information that could change everyone's understanding, but choosing patience because the truth deserves to be revealed the right way. Imagine knowing you could immediately change the entire conversation, but deciding that respect for the process matters more than proving your own importance. That was the discipline Victoria carried with her. Her confidence came from knowing who she was and understanding the responsibility she represented. She did not need to demand recognition because she trusted that facts would eventually speak louder than assumptions. As the situation continued, the difference between power and responsibility became clearer. Officer Whitmore had the authority of his position, but authority without understanding could create problems. Victoria carried a responsibility that required careful judgment and patience. The two forms of power looked similar from the outside, but they represented very different things. Around the station, people began noticing that Victoria was not behaving like someone trying to create conflict. She was behaving like someone protecting something important. Her calm tone, careful words, and steady presence suggested that she understood the situation on a deeper level. The sealed warrant was no longer just a document sitting in the middle of a conversation. It had become a symbol of a larger question. What happens when a person with authority does not recognize the full importance of what they are handling? Officer Whitmore still did not know that the consequences of this moment could extend beyond local decisions. He still believed the situation was within the normal boundaries of the station. But the truth was moving closer. The information hidden behind the document, the reason Victoria remained patient, and the responsibility connected to the warrant were all leading toward a moment when the entire situation would be viewed differently. The situation inside the station had reached a point where silence carried more meaning than words. Victoria Carter continued standing with the same calm presence she had shown from the beginning, but now the people around her were beginning to sense that there was much more behind the sealed warrant than they first believed. The document had become the center of attention, but the real issue was not only the paper itself. It was the responsibility attached to it and the decisions being made by the people handling it. Victoria understood that legal protections existed because important matters required careful judgment. She knew that every step in a legal process existed for a reason. A sealed warrant was created to protect information, preserve fairness, and ensure that the right people could review the right details at the right time. It was not something to be treated casually or dismissed because its importance was not immediately obvious. Officer Daniel Whitmore continued trying to understand the situation from his own perspective. His years in law enforcement had taught him to rely on his instincts and experience. He believed that quick decisions were sometimes necessary, but he was beginning to realize that not every situation could be understood within the first few moments. Some situations required patience before action. Some situations required looking beyond what was visible. He still did not know the full story behind Victoria's presence at the station. He did not know the level of responsibility connected to the document she carried. He did not know that the situation involved a legal process extending far beyond what appeared to be a normal interaction. Victoria noticed the change in the room. She noticed that people were beginning to ask different questions. Instead of only looking at what was directly in front of them, they were starting to consider what they might not know. That change mattered because understanding often begins when people become willing to recognize that their first assumption may not be complete. Imagine watching a room slowly realize that the person they underestimated was never without power. Imagine seeing people discover that the quietest person in the room may have understood the situation better than anyone else. That was the moment Victoria had been waiting for. Not because she wanted attention, but because she wanted the process to be respected. She had never entered the station hoping to prove that she was important. She entered knowing that the truth would eventually reveal itself. Her confidence came from preparation, not pride. Her patience came from experience, not uncertainty. As more questions surrounded the sealed warrant, the difference between local authority and legal responsibility became clearer. Officer Whitmore had the ability to make decisions inside the station, but the situation required more than authority. It required understanding. It required recognizing that some matters involved responsibilities beyond one person's immediate control. The station that once seemed like an ordinary workplace was slowly becoming the place where important decisions would be examined more carefully. The people inside were beginning to understand that the situation was not about one person trying to challenge another. It was about whether a system built on trust would be respected when it mattered most. Victoria remained focused and composed as the moment continued to develop. She knew that the truth did not need to be forced. It needed to be protected. And soon, the people who had overlooked the importance of the sealed warrant would discover exactly why it had been protected from the beginning. The quiet uncertainty inside the station was beginning to transform into something much larger. For the first time since Victoria Carter arrived, the people around her started to understand that the situation was not simply about a document or a disagreement. It was about responsibility, procedure, and the importance of knowing when a matter required more attention than anyone initially expected. Victoria remained composed as she watched the atmosphere change around her. She had seen moments like this before, moments when people believed they understood everything because they only saw what was directly in front of them. She knew that the truth often arrived slowly, not because it was weak, but because important truths required careful handling. The sealed warrant continued to represent something far greater than a piece of paper. It represented a legal process designed to protect information and ensure that decisions were made correctly. Victoria understood that every person involved had a responsibility to respect that process. Officer Daniel Whitmore began noticing details he had previously overlooked. The confidence he had carried when the situation first started was now being replaced by questions. He was not facing a simple misunderstanding. He was facing a situation where the limits of his knowledge became clear. His experience had helped him solve many problems before, but experience could only guide someone through what they recognized. Could not replace the need to listen, verify, and understand. The difference between a quick judgment and a responsible decision was becoming impossible to ignore. Victoria did not use the moment to criticize him. She did not try to make the situation about personal victory. Instead, she remained focused on the same thing she had focused on from the beginning: protecting the integrity of the process. That choice revealed something important about her character. She did not measure strength by how loudly someone could speak or how much attention they could command. She measured strength by the ability to remain steady when others were uncertain. As questions continued, the station slowly became aware that the sealed warrant was connected to responsibilities beyond their immediate understanding. The document had not been protected because it was mysterious. It had been protected because it mattered. The people connected to it had obligations that extended beyond one conversation or one location. Imagine standing in a room where everyone believes they understand your situation, while you know there are important details they have not discovered yet. Imagine having the power to reveal everything immediately, but choosing patience because the truth deserves to arrive through the correct channels. That was the discipline Victoria carried. She trusted the system enough to allow the proper steps to happen. She understood that real justice was not about embarrassing people who made mistakes. It was about ensuring that mistakes were recognized and corrected. As the hours passed, the station no longer felt like an ordinary workplace. The conversations became more careful. The questions became more serious. The people inside began realizing that something much bigger was connected to the sealed warrant. Officer Whitmore could sense that the situation had moved beyond his original understanding. He did not yet know what would happen next, but he knew one thing had changed. The woman standing quietly in front of him was not someone whose importance could be measured by appearance or first impressions. Victoria Carter had never needed to demand respect. She had earned it through patience, professionalism, and trust in the truth. And soon, the station would receive confirmation that the situation was connected to a level of authority far beyond anything they had expected. The moment everyone inside the station had been waiting for finally began to take shape. The questions surrounding Victoria Carter and the sealed warrant were no longer limited to a simple conversation between individuals. The situation had reached a point where the importance of the document and the responsibility connected to it could no longer be overlooked. Victoria remained calm as she watched the people around her begin to understand that there was a much larger story unfolding. She had never doubted that the truth would eventually become clear. She knew that facts did not need to be forced. They needed to be presented through the right channels and at the right time. Officer Daniel Whitmore stood quietly as the situation changed around him. The confidence he had carried earlier was now replaced by a deeper reflection. He began to recognize that the challenge was not about proving who had authority in the room. It was about understanding the responsibility that came with authority. His position gave him the ability to make decisions, but it also required him to recognize when a situation involved matters beyond his immediate understanding. The sealed warrant represented a level of legal responsibility that demanded attention and care. Victoria understood that this was the moment when many people would expect her to reveal everything and take control of the situation. But she chose a different path. She continued to show patience because her goal was never personal recognition. Her goal was protecting the integrity of the process. She believed that justice was strongest when it followed the proper steps instead of relying on emotions or assumptions. As the details surrounding the document became clearer, the atmosphere inside the station changed completely. People who once viewed Victoria as simply another visitor began seeing her differently. They noticed the confidence behind her silence. They noticed the professionalism behind her words. They realized that her calm behavior was not a sign of weakness. It was a sign of preparation. Imagine watching someone enter a room where nobody understands their importance. Yet they remain completely composed because they know the truth will eventually be revealed. Imagine having the ability to change everyone's opinion instantly, but choosing patience because the process matters more than personal pride. That was the strength Victoria carried throughout the entire situation. She did not need to raise her voice. She did not need to demand attention. She allowed the truth to create the impact. Officer Whitmore began facing the reality that experience alone was not enough. A person could spend years believing they understood every type of situation and still encounter a moment that required humility and careful thought. This was not about one person being right and another person being wrong. It was about recognizing the importance of accountability when decisions affect something larger than the individuals involved. Then came the moment that changed the entire atmosphere inside the station. A call was made to verify the details surrounding the sealed warrant. The information that came back confirmed what Victoria had known from the beginning. This matter was connected to a higher level of legal authority. The document was not ordinary. The responsibility behind it was not local. The people inside the station realized that the situation they thought they understood was only a small part of a much larger process. Victoria remained steady as the reality became clear. She had not needed to prove her importance because the truth had done that for her. And somewhere beyond the walls of the station, a response was already beginning. A response that would soon show everyone why the sealed warrant had been protected so carefully from the start. The atmosphere inside the station changed the moment the confirmation arrived. What had once been viewed as a local situation was now understood as something connected to a much larger responsibility. The sealed warrant was no longer seen as a simple document. It represented a legal process that required careful protection, and everyone inside the station began to understand why Victoria Carter had remained so calm from the beginning. Victoria did not celebrate the change in the room. She did not use the moment to make anyone feel small. Instead, she continued doing what she had done since she first arrived. She focused on the facts. She focused on the process. She focused on making sure that the right steps were followed. That choice revealed the difference between seeking power and respecting responsibility. Officer Daniel Whitmore watched as the situation developed beyond his original expectations. He had entered the moment believing he understood the circumstances, but now he was forced to consider the possibility that his first judgment had been incomplete. The experience was difficult because it challenged something many people struggle with, the belief that knowing part of the story means knowing the whole story. He began to understand that authority was not measured only by the ability to make decisions. It was measured by the willingness to recognize when more information was needed. Outside the station, the response connected to the sealed warrant was already moving forward. The arrival of federal officials represented something bigger than an investigation into one moment. It represented the importance of protecting legal procedures that affected more than the people standing in the room. When federal marshals arrived, the atmosphere became even more serious. Their presence showed that the matter had reached a level beyond ordinary station operations. They were not there to create chaos. They were there to ensure that a protected legal process was respected. The people inside the station watched as responsibility shifted from assumptions to accountability. Imagine the feeling of realizing that a situation you thought was simple was actually connected to something much greater. Imagine discovering that the person you underestimated was the person who understood the situation most clearly. That was the lesson unfolding inside the station. Victoria had never needed to prove that she belonged there. Her professionalism had already shown that. Her patience had already shown that. Her commitment to doing things correctly had already shown that. The sealed warrant had not gained importance because of who carried it. It had importance because of the trust placed behind it. Officer Whitmore stood at a moment of reflection. The situation forced him to look beyond his original assumptions and consider the responsibility that came with his position. The lesson was not simply about one mistake. It was about how every decision made by someone with authority could influence the people and systems around them. As the federal marshals secured the proper procedures and the station prepared to answer difficult questions, Victoria remained composed. She understood that justice was not about creating a winner and a loser. Justice was about making sure truth was respected and responsibility was accepted. The people who had once seen the sealed warrant as an ordinary document now understood why it mattered. The person they had underestimated had never lacked importance. They had simply failed to see it. And as the station prepared for the next steps, one thing became clear. The truth had finally entered the room, and nobody could ignore it anymore. The station was no longer the same place it had been when Victoria Carter first walked through the door. What started as a moment filled with uncertainty had become a powerful reminder that truth, responsibility, and justice could change the direction of any situation. The sealed warrant was no longer viewed as an ordinary document. Everyone inside understood that it represented a responsibility that required respect, patience, and careful attention. Victoria stood quietly as the final pieces of the situation came together. She had never wanted recognition. She had never entered the station looking for an opportunity to prove her importance. Her purpose had always been clear. She wanted the process to be respected, and she wanted the truth to be handled the right way. That was the difference between seeking power and protecting justice. Officer Daniel Whitmore reflected on everything that had happened. The experience forced him to look beyond his first assumptions and understand a lesson that extended far beyond one moment inside one station. Authority was not only about having the ability to make decisions. It was about understanding the responsibility behind those decisions. It was about knowing when to listen, when to verify, and when to recognize that there might be more to a situation than what appeared on the surface. Victoria did not view the moment as a victory over another person. She understood that true justice was not built on humiliation. It was built on accountability, fairness, and the willingness to correct what went wrong. The federal response had not arrived to create an enemy. It had arrived to protect a system that depended on trust. The lesson was bigger than the people involved. It was about the importance of every person within a system understanding the impact of their choices. Imagine looking back on a moment when everything seemed ordinary, only to realize that it revealed something much deeper about judgment, responsibility, and character. Imagine discovering that the person you thought had the least power was actually the person carrying the greatest responsibility. That was the reality everyone inside the station had come to understand. Victoria's strength had never come from a title or a position. It came from her patience, her professionalism, and her belief that truth did not need to be forced. It only needed the opportunity to be heard. In the days that followed, the station faced important conversations about procedures, decision-making, and accountability. The experience became a reminder that systems are only as strong as the people who choose to protect their purpose. Officer Whitmore carried the memory of that day with a different understanding of what leadership required. He learned that confidence must always be balanced with humility, and authority must always be guided by responsibility. Victoria continued forward with the same quiet determination she had shown from the beginning. She did not leave the station seeking praise. She left knowing that the most important thing had happened. The truth had been protected. Because in the end, justice is not measured by who has the loudest voice or the strongest position. Justice is measured by whether people choose to respect what is right, even when the truth is not immediately visible. The document was only paper. The lesson was something much greater. He thought he was dealing with a simple situation. But that day he discovered that justice was never about what people assumed. It was about what the truth revealed.